Hello, my name is Sandy Adamitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey writers, it's Super Bowl weekend, and boy, do we have a treat for you. Our guest is television writer Jason Gavin, who happened to get his big break when he got staffed on a television show called Friday Night Lights. Christine Iverson of Nylon Magazine said, Friday Night Lights has achieved a rare trifecta in the world of prestige television. Critical acclaim, cultishly adoring fans, and a genuinely wide audience, which sadly it didn't have when it aired on network television. But what are you going to do? Jason's other credits include Royal Pains, Hawaii Five-0, and Roswell, New Mexico. Jason is a co-executive producer on the much-anticipated return of Dark Winds, the #1 show on AMC Plus, and one of the executive producers on Marvel's Echo, out this summer. Let's get started. Jason Gavin, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
Happy to be here.
It's Super Bowl weekend. Are you a sports fan?
Yes, I'm a big sports fan, particularly football, and I still play in a flag football league out here, although it's getting harder to do as my
You do?
my mind still wants to. My body is
Now, what kind of flag football is this? Is this a group of writers? Is this a group of sports friends of yours? What is this?
It's a combination. We've known each other for like 20 years. Yeah, it's some writers, some actors, some industry people, just a lot of regular civilians. So it's a lot of fun. And because there's like writers and actors, smack talk is a whole other level. Clever and well delivered. And our only rules are don't touch the writer's fingers and don't hit the actor's faces.
I find that incredibly charming. I really do. Jason, before I start asking you some questions, would you like to play a round of Would You Rather?
I would rather do that.
Okay. Would you rather live a peaceful life in a small cabin in the woods or a drama-filled life in a mansion in the big city?
I would say a drama-filled life or a mansion in the big city. I like people. Some writers are very introverted. I'm very extroverted, and I really love the give and take of relationships and people, and that comes with drama and its ups and downs. But it's well
true. Would you rather have a tattoo of the title of the last script you read or the last TV show you watched?
TV show.
And what would your tattoo be?
I just watched an episode of The Sopranos, which is my all-time favorite TV show.
That would be a pretty badass tattoo, don't you think, Sopranos?
Yeah. I've read some just random scripts. So yeah, I'd go with Sopranos, tried and true. And that one for me is that's a series you can watch over and over again.
Would you rather spend a Friday night out with Kurt Stutter, creator of Sons of Anarchy, or Mike White, creator of White Lotus, a Friday night?
Oh, wow. You have really picked two great polar opposites, both who are great writers and would be a great experience. I would say, you know what? That would depend on the day you catch me on. And I'll go against my drama-filled mansion answer and say, right now, I'd be more in the mood to hang out with Mike White. There's less chance of that ending up in a fight or anything like that. Either of those would be very fun. It just depends on the mood.
Would you rather read the book or watch the movie?
Read the book. And I say that with a bit of hypocrisy because one of the things about, being in TV is I have found that I don't have enough time to read as many books as I would like to. Yeah. So I'd rather read the book. I end up watching the movie.
Would you rather be stuck on an island alone or with someone who talks incessantly about MASH?
Oh, I like MASH and I talk a little incessantly myself. I loved that series growing up. So absolutely the MASH thing and just to be with someone else to, hang out and be social.
Would you rather do karaoke or a stand-up show?
I have done both of those. Karaoke because it's easier. Stand up. And when I first came to LA, I was doing stand up and writing, and it helped a lot with doing dialogue and stuff like that. And I don't really get stage fright, but it's stand up is much harder.
Yeah. Would you rather have to watch only Seinfeld reruns or only The Office reruns for an entire year?
Whoa. I would say The Office because I love both of those shows. The Office, I find myself being able to watch more Office stuff just because of the story format in that type of show is, I think, a little. It gives you a little ability to go deeper as a writer and as an audience. So, not to take anything away from Seinfeld. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Exactly. Would you rather hire a staff writer who never fails to write the perfect joke or line of dialogue, or a staff writer whose first draft needs a minimal rewrite?
Ooh, that's a great question because it gets to like what a room is. And it really depends on the context of the room. I mean, you fill out a room of anywhere from 6 to 12 writers and you might have a couple staff writers. So it really depends on what you have with the other writers who are in the kind of hierarchy above them. I would say, yeah, I would say probably a staff writer who turns in good drafts because then that actually gives them more freedom to do kind of what they want to do and probably make it easier in the room for them.
Yes. Would you rather be trapped in a drama with people you hate or trapped in a horror movie with people you love?
Ooh, am I going for like the best ratings or the best personal experience? That's
Personal experience.
okay. I'd say horror movie with the people I love. Although I can't think of many people I really hate or anything, but I'd love to bring in some people I theoretically hate into the horror movie. So they could be the ones in the beginning that the zombies get. Yeah.
Would you rather work for a tough boss you like or an easy boss who annoys you?
That was easy. Tough boss that you like. Because I think also that gets to a showrunner knowing what they're doing and knowing what's going on. Because it's going to be tough. If they're doing it right, it's going to be tough. And they understand that if certain aspects of the job of writing a TV show are not tough, you're probably not doing it right. But do it what you like. There's a lot of joy there.
Yeah. Last question. Would you rather have an extra $10K in your budget every episode or a shaded parking spot with your name on it next to the front door of the first floor writer's room?
Well, 10K doesn't go very far in TV nowadays. I think I would still take that because my first job, which was actually with you on NASH Bridges, which we'll probably talk about, I didn't have a parking spot. I was a writer's PA and I would have to go down to that like fifth subfloor underneath the bedrock of the earth and come back up. So I never got too attached to parking spots. Now I have better parking spots, but I like to think I don't need them and that we could use that $10,000 to do something cool on the show.
Okay. As you mentioned, you and I met as assistants on NASH Bridges. NASH Bridges was a crime drama on CBS and starred Don Johnson and Cheech Marin. They were two inspectors in San Francisco in a special unit, SIU. The show was created by Carlton Cuse, who did Lost with Damon Lindelof, who was also on NASH. Was Damon there when you were there? I can't remember.
Yes. We both worked the very last season of NASH Bridges together.
Right.
And he was one of the few people. Yeah, he was one of the few people like me who at that point didn't have like kids in the family. So so we hung out, and even then he was like a super talented writer who was like,
yeah, Damon was always cool. He's a very gentle soul.
Yeah, he's a great person and a great writer. And yeah, NASH has produced a lot of great writers.
Really did. I know that people will roll their eyes because they hear Don Johnson. And, come on, the guy has been in the business for 40, 50 years?
Yeah. and he knows what he's
He
doing.
knows
I
what
mean,
he's doing.
he knows the audience, he
Exactly.
knows his audience, he knows the type of show to do and insistent upon it. But like, if you're successful, then you're right. So,
Yeah, I used to see his notes. He did notes on every script, as you remember. His notes were
mhm.
good. I mean, they were all about his character, but his notes were really good.
Yeah, and I think you'd rather have that. I would rather have an actor or actors who are very, opinionated and bring a lot to the table, even though that gives you more things as a writer to consider and can sometimes be more work and more complication. The collaboration makes for a better product. And yeah, that's certainly better for, at least for me.
Besides the unfortunate fender bender you got into while picking up lunch, what do you remember most about that time? Was it
Okay.
your first job in the industry?
Yes, yes, it was. I had actually been working on Capitol Hill and been, as a lobbyist meeting with senators and doing like really cool stuff. And I came out here not like some kid out of film school. I was getting coffee and getting lunches and getting Carlton's car from the car wash, but also
Yep.
getting access to the room. It's a fender bender story. I'll tell that very quickly. I was out getting lunch and on a lunch run and I got T-bone. Fortunately, I was okay. It hit the front of my car. I spun around a whole bunch of times. The funny part
That's
was the lunch order that day was soup. I had a huge box of mostly soup in the back of my little junky Honda with like 200,000 miles on it. The soup went everywhere, including all over me. There was some other stuff that wasn't soup. I called the show and they want to know I was okay. They sent another PA out and I was sitting there and, the other PA was like, okay, well, I gotta take this food that's left and I'll take that back to the show. Then I'll come back and get you. So the lesson was the show is more important than any one person who worked on it. And the show must go on, as they say. But so that was the fender bender. The other more important stuff I learned was we mentioned it a little bit. There were some amazing writers that came out of NASH Bridges because it was such a well run show. Like I don't think that it was a coincidence that really great writers and shows came out of the DNA of NASH Bridges. You and I are both big fans of Carlton Cuse and John Wirth, who were the
yes.
top writers on it, who were amazing showrunners. And, NASH Bridges to me it was like this quirky show that was on at like Friday at 10 p.m. This will be a big scandal. I had never watched it before I worked on the show. I think neither Damon or I had because, we were younger and like Friday at 10, we were not honestly home watching CBS, but it ran for a long time. I didn't know much about it. But I mean, the writers that came out of there, Carlton, John, Damon Lindelof, Sean Ryan, who created The Shield, Glenn Mazzara, who ran Walking Dead, tons of people.
Have to say,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Terrific writers. But I think it was part of that was it was such a well-run show by the people who were there. And it was funny at the time, I sort of took it for granted. I mean, that room was really well run, despite anything that was, going wrong with the show or like, just 1,000 little things that come up. You always just were taught to fix it that day. They didn't let problems snowball. They fixed things, kept the writers' room going, kept the writers' room insulated from any of the craziness, just to like make sure that the writers could do their best job so that up on set, they could do their best job. As I said, that was kind of like my default to see how that, those shows were run. Do your damnedest, your best on them, but get your drafts in on time. Because I think a lot of us always fight the thing of like, we want it to be perfect and, we'll procrastinate or put it off because of like that cliche of you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And one of the things you learn is that writing is a process. There's 100 things that will change for better or worse on it. And number one, it's impossible to probably write the perfect script. It'll just get better and better, hopefully over half a dozen drafts or whatever. And that will only happen if you get your stuff in and keep it moving forward. But number two, even if you do think you have the perfect script in TV, 20 things will happen that will change what it is. So whatever this grand thing you had in your head, once it runs into budget and weather and, an actor who didn't want to do that type of thing and saw it a different way, or, a note from the network that they did that a similar storyline, or all these things will change. So you just can't be precious with it.
that's get your drafts in on time is just such sage good advice. It's Super Bowl weekend, and it's a colossal event in this country. And one of the main reasons I wanted to bring you on the show is because you had the privilege to work on one of television's most beloved series, Friday Night Lights. First, can you tell us what Friday Night Lights was about?
Friday Night Lights was a small little show about a small town in Texas, roughly based on the movie and the Buzz Bissinger book about Odessa Midland, a real town and football team, a rural boom and bust town, oil boom and bust town, where the high school football team was kind of the biggest thing that happened. And it was a thing that united the town, and a group of like players and other students who all kind of revolved around, and they all came from challenged backgrounds, underdogs, and they revolved around this football team, the Dillon Panthers, and the couple, the Taylors, who Coach Taylor and his wife, Tammy Taylor, who worked at the school.
Do you remember those first couple of days in the room and how you felt?
Yeah. As a staff writer, which everyone else is at your big break, because holy moly, you're in the room and you're contributing and stuff. But you also realize it's suddenly into the officers club, or like military thing where you're in this tent and other people outside there are like, wow, that person is in there, blah, blah. But you're the lowest officer, you're like the lieutenant. That doesn't mean much when you're sitting down next to generals and colonels. I would say it's universal that everybody, when they're new in this industry, a little insecure and nervous about how much do I speak? Do I speak too much? Do I speak too little? I think the other piece of advice I give every staff writer is you're not there to like save the show or anything. It's like you're there to contribute in whatever way you can, whether it's talking about like football, talking about your stories. The other piece of advice I give people is like identify a couple of people who can tell you how you're doing. Not the showrunner, because the showrunner is probably so busy. They have 200 other worries in their mind. And,
Right.
Believe me, no showrunner is sitting there looking, this staff writer is not talking enough or this or that. That's not top of their mind. Usually it's like mid-level people who have the heart of the teacher and can kind of let you know how you're doing. And you also just have to have a sense of how the room works and what your value is, and find it and fill that hole and be what the show needs you to be.
Great. Very good advice. Usually at the start of a brand new writer's room, there's a period of blue skying. Can you explain blue skying?
Blue sky happens at the beginning of, and I'll explain kind of what it is, but it happens at the beginning of a series, but also in the beginning of the season. And it basically is just like sitting down with other writers and blue skying. The sky is wide open. Basically, so sit there and talk big, broad thoughts. And you usually have like 3 huge whiteboards in the walls around you. If you're lucky in a writer's room, you have a window to look out of. Sometimes 4 walls for whiteboards, which, is a bit like being in a submarine. So you better love the people. But that's when you're just like throwing big ideas out, telling personal stories, diving into characters, getting into their emotions and stuff. And it's kind of like that improv rule of like, yes, and you're just getting as much stuff out in a very friendly, creative space of characters, possible stories. Everyone is throwing out stuff from their lives. You come in every day. You might do it for like a couple weeks, prepared with stuff to pitch. That's also a great time for staff writers to be able to get stuff of theirs out into, because because it has that openness, you're less confined by, boom, we got to make this an episode 10 days or something. After the blue sky process is out and you have all this raw material, then you start the harder process of winnowing it down and saying, okay, what big storylines are we telling this season? Or, was each character's arc going to be? And then you start, whittling those things down and assigning things and getting a season long trajectory out for folks. And then you get into the nitty gritty of breaking out each of those, arcs into individual stories. Blue sky, it's a great time to get all kinds of ideas out there. And just if an idea doesn't make it, a lot of times it'll get punted to like the next season, the season after that, and actually will be done better then because it's the right time for it or whatever.
Right. And where did you shoot, and where was the writer's room?
The writer's room was here in Los Angeles, and we shot it in Austin. The writers rarely went out there. We had terrific producers on set, and back then, that was kind of odd. It was like, I think it kept the show more affordable, which was the only reason that show ran for 5 seasons, because it wasn't a ratings juggernaut, but it was affordably made.
I assume you were comfortable with the sports lingo because you play football, but action sequences. Sometimes you have a gift for it and sometimes you don't. Were you comfortable with the action sequences, or was there kind of a format? Did the upper level writers help you? How'd that work out?
That was the upper level writers, but also like the directors and producing directors out on set. Because as a new writer, generally you might be describing or helping like come up with the genesis of those scenes. But when it gets down to the nitty gritty of something that's like being done 1,000 miles away or whatever, that's generally left up to the people who are out there. You really have to trust your directors. And in TV, people may not know this, but you have a rotation of directors, just like almost like a pitching rotation. If you're doing 13 episodes, you may have like half a dozen directors who each do a couple episodes or something. So they'll have their idea about it. And then you also have your people on set who know how they shoot the football games. Because Friday Night Lights had to be an affordable show, a lot of the times, like multiple episodes worth of football stuff would be shot in one day. Basically, you'd have all the large casts you had to hire, do that. And, you can they know how to do that. Like teams change clothes. It could be the same team in 3 different uniforms playing the opponent or opponents of several things. So
Brilliant. As you mentioned at the top of the show, you've worked on Capitol Hill and you've worked as a lobbyist for Native American issues. You are Native American. You recently signed, along with the members of the WGA West Native American and Indigenous Writers Committee, a letter calling on Hollywood to reject stereotypical portraits of Native people and to hire Native writers, showrunners, directors, and actors to tell their own stories. Can you speak to this? There's this story I know that you have when you try to include a Native character in a script and a producer was confused.
I'd lead off by saying it's like a much better time now. And one of the upsides of the way that TV has changed, there's streaming and there's like, smaller shows that while they might be cheaper or, it can be far more specific. So like you have amazing shows like Reservation Dogs, which
Love that show.
yeah, it's so specific. That couldn't have even existed 25 years ago. And that's one of the most authentic shows. When I grew up, you never saw natives on TV, hardly ever. If you did, they might not even be native. It might be a white person who was made up or whatever. It was certainly not researched well or written by natives. It was kind of inauthentic or based on stereotypes. And I think all natives felt that way. Yes, we hardly had anyone. And it's not just like, oh boy, that's unfair. And also it just has kind of like an impact on things. We learn so much in America and around the world by the images and media we consume. And I think that natives, far more than a lot of other groups, were defined by what was in TV and movies. And it was inaccurate. But it just was this thing where it was almost like,
I agree.
yeah, people would see it and they would write that because that's what they saw, but that they didn't realize that was made by some white guy who never knew anything. And so then the next audience member would become a writer and write that. And it was like a copy of a copy of a copy. And it was just absurd. To me, the reason I went into lobbying, that I saw the real life impact of those inaccuracies. Most people in America, people are learning a lot more. And back then, people didn't know natives. They didn't know anything about them. And that even extended to policies that impacted everyone's lives. Those senators that I was saying that I would meet with, a lot of them only knew what they saw on TV. So, it would be nice to have authentic portrayals because that's the right thing to do. But also it has impacts, real life, negative or positive impacts on millions of people's lives. I think we realize the power of our media. So that was always one of the things that I was fighting for. And when I came out here, most of the shows I would work I think the first, several shows I was on, there were no other minorities in the room, which was kind of crazy. You end up being a minority to speak for everyone, which you can't. I remember trying to do a story about a native character, and it was a more urban setting. And one of the high level producer writers basically just said, well, okay, but how they get there? I was like, what? And I'm like, it was like, well, we need a scene of like how this Indian got, like if I was, there and some Indian came walking in, I'd like want to know like how'd they end up there or whatever. And I'm like, I'm here and I'm talking to you and we don't have to have some again, these are good people. Like we all have our kind of like blind spots. And, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, we have to have a scene for someone to exist. So there's millions of natives out there just doing like their everyday stuff or whatever. So I think the upside of it is now we have the opportunity for no matter who you are, you can make these very specific shows that are coming from a really authentic viewpoint. I think they're way better than the kind of like sad attempts at it or something. Another show I like watching is Rami, the Egyptian Arab young guy whose parents immigrated to America and he's in New York and I knew nothing about that world and I watch it and it's just like, it's very obvious. This was made by folks who know that and they're just telling their story. And it's a terrific story. It's also a world and area that I never knew. So we're at a place where everyone, no matter what you are, they're just like better stories to be told and very specific
Right.
stuff makes for better TV. So I'm very upbeat about that stuff.
Good. I'm glad. Starting out, what was your biggest misconception of what it meant to be a working writer?
I think the amount of time you actually spent writing scripts. When I started, I read some scripts. I would say everybody read a lot more scripts, read tons of good scripts and read them multiple times, break them down. I was impatient like a lot of writers. If you're writing something, you want to see it like as a script. We all get our like formatting software and like we do it. And it's like, cool, this looks like the scripts that I'm reading. But it is that kind of impatience of most writers, I'd say, including myself. You start writing, take a script way too early. And then when you go into a room and you see these super experienced writers who are like way better at writing than I was as a green writer, and they're taking so much time to talk about scenes and one card on the board, kicking the tires of stuff and really talking it through. And you're getting all of these different inputs on it. And you're like, wow, taking 5 or 10 days to have 10 people talk about what one episode is going to be. That kind of like blew me away. But then I saw that the reason that is because then when you go off as the writer and a lot, the process is, all that stuff is taken down, that's been said is taken down in notes. And you get a copy of those note cards and you go off as one writer to work. You have all of these resources. So the story works way better. And you're never in a scene where you're like, thinking, well, wait a sec, this doesn't make sense. Or what would this person be saying? But again, there's that impatience of us that is always champing at the bit. That's like, I want to write this stuff down. And that's another piece of useful advice I would say is it's the same thing as like blue sky. It pays to do a lot of that stuff because then your writing time is far more precious than you realize.
Jason, thank you so much for spending time with us, for sharing your stories and your helpful tips for the writers out there.
It was my pleasure. And thank you for not only doing this amazing podcast, which I think is just really cool because it's one of the things out there that I wish had existed 20 years ago, but just for being such a great person in this industry. And do know that I will always bring you coffee, no matter what.
Oh, Jason, thank you. That's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and thrive. Till we get to hang out again, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Executive producer, Kristen O'Verne. Producers, Terry Sampson and Sandy Adamitis. Music by Ethan Stoller.